Hello and welcome to this SEoClarity webinar on our State of the Enterprise SEO Industry report. This is our annual report on the observations that we've made over the past year about the biggest changes, the biggest developments in SEO, particularly with Google search, combined with our proprietary data from our vast database of keywords, query research, and all of our clients across the globe. All that brought together to bring to you the things that mattered most in 2020 and that we believe will matter most coming into 2021. So here's what we're going to talk about today. First of all, the rapid changes in the SERPs. That continues to be the story. How search result pages are developing, evolving, changing continually is probably the number one thing that we should be paying attention to and adjusting our strategy for. Given that, does traditional ranking matter anymore? Given the proliferation of search features and other items and other aspects of how the search result pages are changing, is it as important anymore to be number one in the traditional 10 blue links? Why we need to be moving from just keywords to topics and intent. Keywords still remain central to SEO research, always will. But those should lead us to deeper thinking, topical thinking, intent-based thinking, that matches up better with our users and better with how Google is operating these days to analyze what should be ranking and showing in its search results. Stories that continue to develop during 2020 and into 2021, the importance of schema markup, what's happening with answer boxes, featured snippets in particular, images, and the proliferation of images in search continues to grow, but do they matter for us? And then the two latest large announced updates to Google, the Core Web Vitals and the Google AI updates. We'll cover both of those comprehensively for you. So a lot to cover here. Let's dive right in. It's definitely in 2020 coming into 2021, still not your parents' SERP. Meaning, really, looking back even a year, 2 years ago, certainly 5 or 10 years ago, the search result pages look very differently, and they're still changing almost daily as Google experiments with new features, new ways of presenting results, new ways of getting the information and answers that users want and need. Let's look at some of those changes and how they've been occurring. These are two very important numbers, and they're numbers you're only going to find from us at SEoClarity. They come from our looking at our sample of over 6.3 million keywords globally. That first number, 1,200 plus, is the number of unique features that we found in Google SERPs. Now, by feature, we mean anything from the big visible things like an answer box, a featured snippet, an image carousel, people also ask, down to the tiniest little alterations or changes that can appear in very specific queries and very specific changes, sometimes adding just little things to an organic web result itself. All of these are unique features, and they all take up space on the search page. They all change the way the page is presented to a user, so they're all important. However, the 200 number is the amount that we found on more than 0.2% of keywords. So the vast majority of those 1,200 plus don't show up very often. They only show up for very specific queries. Still, there are a lot of things, as we're going to see, a lot of changes, a lot of updates that are present in the search results, and that as SEOs we need to be paying attention to. One more thing before we leave this screen. We do this update annually. And last year when we looked at this, that first number was a little over 800. I think it was 850 plus. So the number of search features is continually growing. That's one of the big stories for 2020 going into 2021. Another thing that people were concerned about, particularly at the beginning of 2020, was the proliferation of what we call zero-click searches. These are search results where supposedly the user doesn't click on anything, at least that we could measure back when we had those metrics. Rand Fishkin put out this data in 2019, claiming that a little over half of all of the search pages resulted in 0 clicks, which would seem to be a huge concern for us in organic search and spawned another whole bit of speculation about SEO being dead. However, let's dig a little deeper on that. First of all, we need to separate out true 0-click SERPs from other kinds of clicks that simply aren't going to our third-party websites. So on the left here is an example of a true zero-click search result. The query is, what time is it? Google shows the time. That's all you needed to know. It's very unlikely that you're going to click on anything else for that. You've got the full information right there in the search. However, many things that were showing up in those statistics as zero-click searches were simply clicks that we can't track or evaluate with the tools that were available at the time. And a great deal of those are clicks going through to Google properties, either domains that are directly owned by Google or have the google.com designation, I should say, domain name, or domains that are owned by Google, but not google.com specifically. So these are still clicks. Things are getting clicked on in the search results. They just happen to be going to Google properties here. Still sounds like maybe bad news for organic search. And when you look at this kind of thing, we actually look at the search results themselves and how they have changed and how the search results are now, in some cases, seeming to compete with us just by the way they're presented. Here's a search from October 2016 for hotels. We have 4 ads, actually 3 ads showing, and those have been around for a long time. So that's something we've been taking into our account for a long time here now. But on a desktop computer, the first organic web result, the first result that you would click on that's organic and that would go to a third-party website is on the first fold. That is, if you're on a desktop computer here, you wouldn't have to scroll to see that. However, look at the same search in November of 2020. I had to, in order to get the first organic result showing here, I had to zoom in so far that I'm losing resolution, as you can see. So what's changed here? Well, we see this big map result between the ads and the first organic result. Now, that's not only pushed our first organic result much further down the page, it actually pushed it off the first fold to the second fold. That means a user now would have to physically scroll down the page to see that first organic result. So you can see that visibility here becomes a major factor in the SERPs. However, the overall news is not that bad. Our analysis of over 500 sites, looking at over 19 billion clicks over the span of a year, showed that nearly a third of the traffic to sites is still driven by organic search. So SEO, search engine optimization, search experience optimization, still matters very much. It's still the most important source of traffic to almost all websites. Let's turn now to the question coming out of that of ranking. So if visibility in search, if the competition of search features, all of these things is increasing, then is ranking out the window, traditional ranking? And by that traditional ranking, we mean where you stand in the traditional 10 blue links. And as you see this animated representation here, to find those 10 blue links, now you often have to scroll further and further down a page, especially on mobile. Now, the competition for visibility in the SERPs isn't just from the search features pushing things further and further down the page, but actually the nature of organic search results themselves, as some of those 1,200 plus features that we talked about get more and more incorporated into search results, especially as sites are taking advantage of Schema. So here we go with one example of a pretty traditional organic search result. We have the blue link, we have the URL, a 2-line meta description. In this case, one search feature there, an early iteration of site links there, small, not very useful, not taking up very much space. But now look at another iteration of this same query here for TripAdvisor, who've implemented some Schema, and we see not only a lot more information, but look at the difference in vertical space between those two results. It's not huge difference, but you accumulate a lot of results like that, and you're pushing all the results below it a little bit more further and further down the page, a little bit more distance that the user has to go to find those results. And finally, here's an example where Booking.com used FAQ schema to get these FAQs showing here, and look at how much space that is taking up. Imagine that you're the number 2 or 3 result below that, and especially on mobile now. That user is going to have to really put in an effort to find your search result. So this is where a tool like SEoClarity Visibility Share, introduced just this past year in 2020, becomes incredibly useful because it gives you the metrics that tell you your true position in search, your true competition. Let's look at just a few of those metrics that Visibility Share would show you in the window, how it gives you something beyond just your traditional ranking reports. First of all, you can find your real SERP competitors. What we have to take into account these days is that our competitors are no longer just other businesses in our vertical who are also trying to rank in the search results, but it's search result features themselves. For this particular domain, here's its top competitors. And notice now that we have to, in Visibility Share, we show this not just as competitor, but at the top heading there, feature and competitors, because search features are now competitors. Look at the list here. Before we get to the first organic web result, the first traditional organic search result, we have a knowledge panel, we have something from a google.com domain, we have ads, of course, people also ask, a refinement box of the people also ask box, video carousels, and then we reach wikipedia.org, the first organic result. So these are on the average, of course, but all of these things are showing up on top of the organic results here. Another thing that Visibility Share gives us is what I call the metrics that matter. So we can see things like our visual rank, which is counting all of the features on the page. So if you have a image carousel and a featured snippet, and then you're the first organic result, your visual rank is actually 3, not 1, because you have those 2 other features above you. Another one is fold visibility, which shows us what fold we're in. So here we see that for this particular domain, some of their keywords are showing up in the second fold. Those might be opportunities. We want to think now in terms of, especially with mobile devices, in terms of folds rather than pages. Are you showing up in that first fold, what the user can see on their screen when it loads without having to scroll? If you're in the second fold, that's an opportunity where you might want to try up and move up that first fold. And our statistics show that on the whole, when users are able to move up from the second fold to the first fold, CTR increases dramatically. Finally, our proprietary share of visibility metric, which is a percentage that shows your exact visibility on the page. The higher the percentage, the more visible you are on that search result page. So this is a weighted metric that's much more useful for comparing with competitors and between keywords. So all these are different ways of looking at your ranking that we think are more relevant in 2020 coming into 2021. So how should we respond to this changing SERP landscape? We need to shift our focus from just traditional ranking reports alone to looking at what's actually showing up on the SERP page. We shouldn't panic about zero-click searches, because in the most cases they're going to things we're not going to get traffic for anyway, and organic search is alive and well, still accounting for almost 1/3 of all of the traffic to websites. But we should also be including strategies for identifying and prioritizing opportunities to rank for things other than those traditional organic web results, where it makes sense. So where you can earn a spot into a search feature that's showing above the organic web results, that can make a dramatic difference for you depending on the circumstance. Another big movement that we're seeing, it began a while ago, but it's becoming even more prominent as we're going to see something that Google is explicitly saying they are looking for and should be optimizing for, is search intent. The first big move toward that in recent years actually happened in 2019, and that was the introduction of BERT, which is simply natural language processing on steroids. It's the ability of Google to better understand the relationship of words in a query, and to suss out more what somebody actually means by a query, including former stop words, small words that search engines used to ignore, but now they can include and make a big difference, because sometimes those small words make a huge difference in what the searcher actually means by their query. So that all that means that Google is much more able to sniff out user intent more accurately. And by the way, as we're going to see in the most recent updates announced, that's now moved from previously being just 10% of the queries. Now BERT is applied to almost all queries, meaning Google's ability to sniff out search intent of any particular query has vastly increased and is vastly more in use. Useful for that as you're planning your content in seoClarity is keyword intent, which shows up in several different places on our tool, our platform, especially in our research grid, where for any given keyword we show the main intents, and we use artificial intelligence to sniff that out, actually looking at the search results themselves, the content that ranks, all these things, to sniff out what the likely intent is, so that you can match your content to the intent of the user. Not only better for the user, but important because Google is optimizing for that as well. So we want to be moving from keywords to thinking about intent, topics, things like this, realizing keywords can have multiple intents. When they do, you need to be having content that is going to apply to all those user intents. Looking at the SERPs can be a clue to what the intent is, or if you're at scale, you can use a tool like seoClarity, where we've done that work for you. Keyword research now is a basis for developing out content, topical content strategies, so that you're matching up more closely with user intent. Let's look briefly at Schema. Schema continues to be a growing area and has grown to become really something that should be considered now a fundamental of SEO. We see that as Schema is implemented on the whole across sites, implemented successfully, the main benefit is increasing click-through rate. It's important to emphasize Schema markup is not a ranking factor. Google's been very clear about that. But it can affect click-through rate because it improves your appearance in the SERPs. It improves both the amount of real estate you take up on the search page and the attractiveness of your particular result, attracting users to click more often. So here's an example. We see here a relatively simple search result here with at least some specifics to now Google is able, using Schema, to add even more detail to that. The imagery now in these individual search results within the search result. So using Schema to jazz up, if it will, your search results to make them more attractive, more clickable. And the big news in Schema has been, for a while now, the implementation of FAQs, because they add so much value in the search result. As you see here, not only do they take up more space, which means you're pushing that competition even lower on the page if they're below you, but also the ability to get directly to what a user is looking for, to satisfy them more fully. And that means happier users. That means heading off by answering questions, specific questions. You're heading off potential objections. So it's a greater user experience all around. Our response to that seoClarity has been to introduce this past year Schema.dev, our suite of absolutely free tools that you can use right now, at least 2 of them, to help you to implement Schema more simply. Schema Builder, which recently won the US Search Awards for Best SEO Tool, is a free tool that lets you paint right on the content of a page and creates the code for you, so you don't even have to know how to build the code. Schema Tester, which is also available now as a browser plugin that will test the validity of Schema code on any page on your site. And coming soon, Schema Deployer, which will help enterprise level companies and brands to deploy Schema at the massive scale that they need. So our response here is simply to realize, especially with FAQ Schema, that it can have a lot of benefits, but do be aware, because people, when it came out and when Google was showing it so much in the search, people tended to over-optimize for it, to apply it to pages that didn't really apply. And so Google's been a little more restrictive of it now. So our advice is to apply FAQ Schema in particular where it makes sense. Use Schema, but use it responsibly. Use every type of Schema where it makes sense to use it, and you'll begin to see it show up in the search results for you. Let's talk about answer boxes. Answer boxes were pretty wild in 2017, 2018, even going into 2019, meaning the percentage of where Google would show them, the queries that would get them, not going when it's going up and down. They've pretty much settled into now between about 16, 17, and 20% of all of our keywords that we watch. So they're a lot more steady now, but still some up and down. Don't be surprised if you see answer boxes coming and going for queries. Google's always experimenting. Just because it disappears one day doesn't mean it's gone forever. It can be back a few days later, a few weeks later. Also, the industry makes a big difference. So you see like health, finance, law and government, family and community, all the beauty, personal care, all of these are verticals where you're going to see a lot more answer boxes. It tapers off for some others. However, if you compare this chart to our blog post on this topic, on our state of the search industry for 2019 from last year, you'll see that the graph has evened out a little bit more here. Google's spreading out now into more areas where they're showing answer box keywords. Once again, seoClarity. We have the ability built in to show you where your opportunities are to find these answer boxes that you might want to get into and rank for in our Research Grid answer box feature. So our response here that we think you should have going into 2021, it's still worth testing going after featured snippets, but you have to do it with a strategic goal. Here's some of the reasons why you might want to look at a featured snippet and want to try to capture a position there. First of all, is it held by a competitor that matters to you, and is that hurting you? Do you think that the competitor is getting stealing clicks from you because of that? That would certainly be a good situation where you'd want to try to optimize to win that featured snippet. Second is where you can create a featured snippet situation that is likely to get clicked. Some featured snippets are going to be more likely to result in clicks than others. And it's basically where you're providing the nugget of the answer, but there's a lot more that the user is going to want to learn, and they're incentivized to click through to your actual web page. And even in cases where you don't think the featured snippet is going to get you clicks, does it make sense just to have your brand presence there from a brand awareness standpoint? If a competitor is showing up there and it's their logo in the featured snippet, it's their URL, do you want to have that just so that you're visible, that you're showing up at least? So how you do all that? You keep creating content that answers the most likely prospect questions. Let's talk for a moment about images, because images continue to be a huge part of the SERPs after in 2016 through 2019, growing more and more. They've now settled in to be pretty steadily around 70% of all keyword searches showing image results. So when you hear like 70% of all results have image results in them, it would seem like a no-brainer that you should be competing for images and optimizing for images. However, look at this. At the same time, images only account for about 12% of the impressions in these results. And when we look at through to clicks, it's minuscule. It's like less than, or excuse me, a little bit more than 0.5% of the clicks are going to image results. So the bottom line there is that images can drive traffic to your site, but it's not a given. You need to think about it, especially when you see how low the CTR is for images versus videos or regular web results. So think about it in terms of does it matter or make sense for your particular industry and the way your prospects search. If you have products that are particularly visual in nature, where people are looking for how it looks, how it appears, then optimizing for images might make sense for you. Other reasons it might be worth it is that Google is increasingly testing ways of directly monetizing from image results, such as adding transactional information or even a buy button on videos. If you're seeing on images, if you're seeing those kind of features in image results for your keywords, then it might be more important for you to optimize for those. The fact that mobile image carousels take up so much space on the search result page, you might want to be in those. Same thing with image snippets. Finally, let's talk about the two big search ranking announcements made by Google this year. It's such a rare occasion when Google actually comes out and says, this is something we're changing about how our algorithms, how they rank search results. When those come out, we really want to pay attention to those. So let's finish by looking at some detail about those. And the first of those from earlier this year was the Core Web Vitals announcement, along with the page experience update. So in this blog post back in early May of 2020, Google announced the concept of Web Vitals. And this is a new set of metrics that they said we're going to begin to prioritize that all have to do with not the search result itself, but with the click and the page. What is the user's experience on your site once they get there? Why does Google care about that? Because ultimately people judge a search engine by the quality of what they get after they click through. So Google more and more wants to give users the experience that they want to have on web pages, particularly on mobile. Now, out of those Web Vitals, they named these 3 brand new metrics as the core Web Vitals, meaning the things that matter most to them. They all have to do with speed, page speed, and particularly how that page speed is experienced in ways that matter to the user. So these metrics have to do with things like, when does the first main content appear in a way the user can actually begin to read it or view it? When can the user begin to interact with things on the page without them jumping around or moving around? And speaking of jumping around, when does all that jumping around stop? When does the page become something static that the user can view what they want, find what they want, and do what they want? These are all things that are going to be measured by Google now and going to become part of an upcoming algorithmic update, which is known as, or going to utilize what Google calls the page experience signals. So in addition to those core Web Vitals, which have to do with how content loads, how a page loads, and the user experiences that, also things like, is the page mobile friendly? Is it safe and secure? And does it have too many popovers, pop-ups, interstitials that get in the way of the user getting to what they came to the page for? All of these together are called the page experience signals, and Google then announced that those are going to become part of the algorithm, and that in 2021, they would become an actual measurement that Google would use to affect search rankings. Once again, jumping into SEoClarity here, our page speed analysis feature has now incorporated those core Web Vitals. So you don't need to go anywhere else. It's just another way in which SEoClarity becomes your one-stop for all of the vital SEO information that you need. So responding to core Web Vitals, keep in mind that Google has now announced it's going to be implemented in May of 2021. They're giving us plenty of time, but depending on when you're seeing this, that time is ticking away. So you should be making plans now for how you need to make improvements related to the core Web Vitals. However, this is my opinion, I don't think it's going to be a top ranking factor. So maybe not your highest priority. I don't think it's going to be like one of the things that they look at first, but I have a feeling this is going to be more of what I call a tiebreaker, meaning in a very competitive search result page where a lot of other things are equal or nearly equal between the competing sites, competing pages, then the experience, the core Web Vitals and the overall page experience might be used as a kind of tiebreaker and the bump given to the site that provides the better page experience. And finally, let's talk about the most recent announced updates, which Google calls Search On AI updates. This was their blog post announcing that in October. And let's dig right in here to the kind of nitty-gritty. There were like 9 or 10 updates of various sizes that were announced here. I'm going to just give you the few that I think are the most interesting and important from an SEO standpoint. But some overall points about them. They are a collection of artificial intelligence-driven search updates. It's Google attempting to more and more drive how they evaluate search results by artificial intelligence and machine learning, and particularly in the way that they apply that to language recognition, to more and more queries. And finally, most interestingly, some new ways to rank not just a content page as a whole, but actually sections of content or very specific types of content. Some basic facts to know about this. Most of these changes affect about 10% of the queries, but one of them already has hit 100%. We've already seen that one. We'll talk about it in a moment. Some of them are already in effect. Some are rolling out, some by the end of this year or into early next year. We already mentioned this, so I'll just cover it quickly here, that BERT now processes almost 100% of the queries. Here's a great example of how that affects here. As you see this, this query in this Google example illustration, where somebody's had a very specific query looking for 2019 Brazil traveler to USA needs a visa. Before, Google would have just shown a general information page about visa information. Now, using this BERT processing, they can dig down and find a page that exactly answers that question, specific to Brazil, specific to 2019, specific to a USA visa, and whether that's needed. So again, intent, topicality, very, very important here. We said, it's helping Google discern that search intent. And where it was formerly applied only 10% of queries, it's now almost 100%. It affects almost everything. And that is the one that is active now. We're already seeing this in the search results. So your implications and actions for that, you can't really optimize for BERT, but you should be seeing, if you have a wide range of content, you have a lot of content covering all your main topics, you should be seeing potential for more traffic from long tail or more obscure queries. Look at your query reports. If you're seeing more long tail results there, if you're getting more traffic overall to your content, this may be one reason. So the one thing you do here, continue producing content, continue your coverage of topics. As always, having comprehensive, well-written, well-structured content that's clear in its intent match, that's where you're going to benefit. Now, this is the one that we all find the most interesting. This is really new, passages. So what is passages? It's the ability to rank an individual passage, an individual section, a paragraph, a group of paragraphs from a page, not just a whole page. So Google can pull out now in response to specific queries you see here in the example, not just a whole page that's somewhere on the page that specific queries intent may be covered, but the actual passage and feature it right in the search results. This might be some concern, as featured snippets were when they first came out. I've heard a lot of SEOs say, oh no, they pull us out, the answer's right there, nobody's going to click through on this. However, if you've got good comprehensive content, the fact is, I think in a lot of cases, as we found with featured snippets, they will drive traffic because people sometimes hear it's not just like asking for the time. They want to get that specific answer, but then there's more that they want to know. And if you're the one appearing there, you're the one they're going to click on to find out more that they want to know, to go to your more complete content. Now, this is not an opportunity, however, to rank your page for a topic and get these passages ranking. What Google says that they're using this for is to seek out those pages on the web that formerly weren't ranking for anything, but maybe have that one or two paragraphs in there that are super useful to a very specific set of queries, and the ability to pull those out and rank them. So in some cases, your content that wasn't ranking before may start to show up as passages results here. Google says this will show up for about 7% of the searches, and they're rolling it out gradually now in late 2020. So again, not something you can really optimize for, but just make sure your content covers your topics comprehensively, structure that content well, use headings, subheadings, make sure your paragraphs are well focused. These are all things that Google could use to find this type of passage content. And as always, adding more semantically relevant words, and seoClarity's Content Fusion is your go-to for that. And finally, let's look at subtopics here. This is Google's attempt to diversify the search results more where that's warranted. This is going to be mostly for head term type of searches where Google can always not be sure that what the exact intent or the more specific thing a searcher might be looking for. So think of this as like people also ask or related topics on steroids, where they're going to be able to bring in a more diverse set of search results, organic web results, where they think that that's warranted. And that's going to be rolling out by the end of the year. Implications for all of us, you want to have more and more standalone content that's on specific topics. So, make sure you've got big content that covers the main topic well, but then keep building out that subtopic content, those more fractional divisions of the content, and keep that interlinked together in that hub and spoke strategy that makes it easy for Google to find that, and you'll start showing up more and more in these subtopic relations. So as we go into 2021, we're going to keep emphasizing what we always have at seoClarity. It's what we build our platform around. It's how we advise all of our clients. Move your thinking from search engine optimization to search experience optimization. So much of what I just showed you in this webinar has to do with the experience of the user on the search result page, as well as on your pages on your site as well. Be thinking about improving that experience in every possible way, and you're going to be winning in 2021.